So imagine you are standing out on a sun-baked racetrack. Like the asphalt is just radiating heat right through the soles of your shoes.
Oh, man, yeah.
You can feel it.
Right, and someone tosses you the keys to this multi-million-dollar high-performance race car.
Okay, I am tracking with you.
You slide into the driver's seat, you smell the leather, you see the dashboard gleaming with all those digital displays, the steering wheel feels, perfectly molded to your hand.
Sounds incredible, honestly.
It does, and the track ahead is just completely clear. The air is still. But then, you were given one strict, unbending command: drive.
Just drive.
Yeah. You have to complete the circuit in record time. So you press the pedal to the floor, and nothing happens.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. You turn the ignition, silence, no roar, no vibration. You pop the hood, you step out into that blistering heat, you look inside the engine bay, and you realize something absolutely devastating.
Oh, no.
There is no engine.
Wow. That's a brilliant shell of a car, right? Like, you have all the mechanics of motion, all the structural design intended for speed. Yeah, aerodynamic perfection.
Right, aerodynamic perfection, but zero internal capacity to actually move an inch. You have a command, and you have a vehicle, but you lack the actual cause.
Welcome to Reform Thinking. You are the third person in the room with us today for a deep dive into the Christian doctrine of providence.
We are so glad you're here with us.
We are. And today, we're looking at the final chapter of Hebrews, specifically verses 20 and 21. Our mission today is to take two incredibly dense theological sources that dissect this text and break them open for you.
And the core thesis we are looking at today is just staggering. I mean, it really is.
It's huge. The assertion is that God does not just demand obedience from a distance, he actively creates that obedience within his people.
Right. It is not just some proposal waiting for your signature. It is an unfailing performance on his part.
Yeah, the law tells you to drive, but without the engine of grace, you are going nowhere.
The theological weight of this text, I mean, it really cannot be overstated. Modern secular philosophies continually tell us that human flourishing is the product of sheer will.
Oh, all the time.
Right. They insist you are the master of your fate. You are the undisputed captain of your soul. We hear this in corporate boardrooms. We hear it in self-help seminars.
We just absorb it through cultural osmosis,
We do. But the sources we are looking at today assert something radically different. They argue that apart from Christ, humans can do nothing. We are entirely dependent on divine action for any genuine obedience.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we are going to grasp the gravity of Hebrews chapter 13, we have to step back into the first century setting.
We really do. Context is everything here.
Who needed to hear that they lacked the engine? Like, who was receiving this letter and what were they actually facing on a random Tuesday morning?
Well, the original audience consisted of Jewish Christians who were living under the brutal hostility of the Roman Empire. Historians place this likely during the reign of Claudius or, the early darkening days of Nero.
So things were getting really bad.
Very bad. We are not talking about abstract philosophical debates in some comfortable air-conditioned academy. These believers were actively losing property.
Wow.
Imagine being a baker or a tradesman in Rome, and suddenly your non-Christian neighbors just refuse to buy your goods.
Because you're a Christian.
Right. And then the local magistrate comes in and confiscates your shop because you refuse to offer a simple pinch of incense to the genius of the emperor.
They were just losing all their societal standing.
Exactly. I mean, precisely. Their physical security was entirely compromised. The friction of existing as a despised minority in a pagan culture, combined with aggressive ostracization by their unbelieving Jewish brethren, had just worn them down to the marrow.
That makes the situation so much more visceral. Like they are exhausted, they're looking around, seeing their homes confiscated, watching their friends get dragged into the streets or imprisoned.
It was relentless.
And they are waking up in the middle of the night, wondering if following this invisible Messiah is actually worth the cost. It's just a terrifying way to live.
It is. And that brings us to the primary temptation they faced: apostasy.
Giving up entirely.
Yeah, they were severely tempted to abandon the finality of Christ and retreat to the familiar, legally protected shadows of the Old Covenant Levitical system.
Because Judaism was legal, right?
Right. In the Roman Empire, Judaism was a recognized legal religion, a religio licita. The Romans respected antiquity, and Judaism was ancient.
But Christianity was new and suspicious.
Completely. Christianity was increasingly viewed as an illegal, subversive superstition. So stepping back into the local synagogue meant immediate safety.
It meant getting your business back.
Yes, and it meant your children wouldn't be targeted. But the author of Hebrews recognizes this urge to retreat as literal spiritual suicide.
I want to pause on that psychology for a second, though. Because why is a tangible ritual so tempting when faith gets hard?
That's a great question.
Think about our own nature. When the world feels chaotic today, when a listener is facing a crisis at work or, a total breakdown in their family, people instantly crave a checklist.
We do. We want control.
Right. We want a visible ritual, a set of physical steps we can measure, rather than trusting an invisible reality. It just feels safer to check a box than to trust a resurrected Savior you cannot see.
The Jewish Christians had the temple.
Yeah.
They had the priests, the incense, the sacrifices. It was sensory. It was right there in front of them.
But the sensory nature of the Old Covenant was part of its design and also its massive limitation, right?
It was. And that brings us to the fatal flaw of the Old Covenant administration. It demanded perfect obedience, but it could not generate the spiritual life necessary to produce that obedience.
It had the rules, but no engine.
Precisely. The historical tragedy of the nation of Israel was this covenantal failure. I mean, Moses himself stood before the people of Israel after seeing all the miracles in Egypt, and he lamented this in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 4.
What did he say?
He told them, "To this day the Lord has not given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear." The law written on stone tablets condemns. It points out every single flaw. But the Spirit gives life.
The law kills.
Yes. The author of Hebrews knows that if these exhausted Christians go back to the synagogue, they're going back to a system of stone that simply cannot save them.
So how does the author counter this? Because if I'm writing to a group of terrified people who are about to lose their homes, my first instinct might be to just give them a pep talk or a linger of survival rules.
Right, you want to be practical.
Yeah, I might say, hang in there. Here are 5 ways to endure persecution.
The author totally anticipates that very human urge, and he completely subverts it. Notice his method here. He does not start his letter by giving them a behavioral checklist.
He doesn't start with rules.
Not at all. Instead, he spends 10 solid chapters doing nothing but proving the absolute supremacy of Jesus Christ.
When chapters?
10 chapters. He methodically demonstrates that Christ is superior to the angels. He proves Christ is superior to Moses. He proves Christ is superior to Aaron.
Just hammering the point home.
He is. Christ ministers in a better tabernacle. He offers a better sacrifice. And he mediates a better covenant based on better promises. He is essentially saying, why would you go back to the shadow when the substance has actually arrived?
I think we need a better way to visualize this than the usual analogies. Let's think about an architect's blueprint.
Okay, I like this.
The Old Covenant was like a set of incredibly detailed blueprints for a massive mansion. The blueprints show you where the walls are, where the roof is, where the foundation goes. You can study the blueprints all day.
But you can't live in them.
Right. You cannot sleep inside a blueprint.
Yeah.
You cannot take shelter from a storm inside a piece of paper. The blueprints were meant to point you to the actual building.
And Christ is the building.
Christ is the actual shelter.
Yeah.
So the author of Hebrews is telling them, you are standing inside the solid, fortified mansion, and you are terrified of the storm outside, so you are trying to run back out into the rain to hide under a piece of paper.
Oh, that is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The shadows are completely useless when the substance is standing right in front of you.
Exactly. I mean, spot on.
And that massive theological setup in the first 10 chapters is what makes the severe commands of chapter 13 even possible. After proving that the substance has come, the author finally issues his commands.
What does he ask them to do?
Well, in chapter 13, he tells them to show brotherly love, to show hospitality to strangers, to remember those in prison, to keep the marriage bed undefiled, and to keep their lives free from the love of money.
That is a lot to ask of people who are losing everything.
It is. He is asking people who are actively losing everything to share what little they have left. He knows exhausted, terrified believers cannot accomplish this in the flesh.
You need the engine.
Right. And this leads perfectly into the benediction in verses 20 and 21. The theology guarantees the obedience. The author is about to show them the engine inside the car.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's shift into the mechanics of the text and do a phrase-by-phrase exegesis of verse 20. It begins with the phrase, "Now may the God of peace."
Yes.
Why does he choose that specific title? Why not the God of power or the God of endurance, considering what these people are going through?
That title, the God of peace, is highly specific and deliberate. It is easy for us to read that and think it refers to a sentimental calm or a tranquil mood, like a quiet morning with a cup of coffee.
Like an inner zen or something.
Right. But in this context, it refers to objective reconciliation achieved through the cross. It means the cosmic war between a holy, wrathful God and sinful man has ended.
It's an objective reality.
It is a legal standing. The holy judge has been fully satisfied by the blood of the Son. The reason he uses this title here is absolutely crucial for the believer's psychology.
How so?
You cannot pursue sanctification from a place of terror, hoping your good works will somehow purchase your acceptance. You must pursue holiness from a place of established, unshakable peace.
That reframes everything. If I am trying to obey God because I am terrified, He is going to strike me with lightning if I fail. My obedience is just a form of self-preservation.
It's just fear.
Yeah. But if the war's already over, my obedience becomes a response of gratitude.
Precisely.
Then the text moves to the next phrase, discussing the resurrection. It says, "Who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus."
The resurrection here is presented as the Father's supreme vindication of the Son's atoning work. It is the ultimate receipt of payment.
The receipt, I love that.
When Christ was on the cross, he bore the infinite penalty for sin. If he had remained in the grave, it would mean the penalty was not fully paid. Death would still hold the claim.
But he didn't stay in the grave.
No. God did not just reverse a physical death. He publicly declared that the sacrifice was accepted. The debt is entirely canceled.
So I mention it right here.
The author brings this up right before talking about our obedience because he wants the readers to deduce something. If God has the power to conquer death in Christ, he certainly has the power to conquer indwelling sin in you.
Oh, wow. Next, we see Jesus called the great shepherd of the sheep. I feel like we lose the edge of this metaphor today because we see so many soft, pastoral paintings of Jesus holding a lamb.
We really do.
But to a first-century Jewish audience, calling Jesus the great shepherd carries a massive prophetic weight, doesn't it?
It carries an enormous, almost aggressive weight. This invokes the prophetic promises of Ezekiel chapter 34. In the Old Testament, the false shepherds of Israel, the kings, the priests, the leaders, they abused the flock.
They're terrible leaders.
They fed themselves instead of the sheep. They clothed themselves with the wool, but they let the sick sheep die and the lost sheep wander. Yahweh spoke through Ezekiel and pronounced massive judgment on those leaders.
He fired them, basically.
He did, and he promised to step in personally. He promised to set up one shepherd from David's line who would actually feed and guard the flock.
And that's Christ.
Christ is that sovereign leader. He owns the sheep. He guides them. He fights off the wolves. And unlike human leaders who fail and abandon their posts, he never loses a single one.
Then we get this phrase, by the blood of the eternal covenant. What is the author referencing here? Blood sounds very archaic to a modern ear. Why couldn't God just declare the covenant with words?
The shedding of blood in the biblical framework is the required mechanism for atonement. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins.
Right.
This phrase roots back into Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. Those passages promise a new covenant where God will actually write his law on the hearts of his people. The blood of Christ is the currency that secures this internalized law.
It buys the new heart.
Yes. The old covenant was ratified with the blood of animals, which had to be repeated endlessly. The new covenant is eternal because the blood of the Son of God has infinite, inexhaustible value.
I'm stuck in the grammar of this section in the sources we are looking at. The text says, God brought Jesus from the dead by the blood of the eternal covenant. What does that even mean? How does blood raise someone from the dead?
What's fascinating here is this is one of the most astonishing grammatical features in the entire New Testament. The prepositional phrase, by the blood of the eternal covenant, strictly modifies the resurrection.
Okay, break that down for us.
Think about the legal ramifications of this. It means the blood-bought perfection of the finished work legally demanded the resurrection.
Demanded it.
Yes. Christ's perfect active obedience in keeping the law throughout his life and his passive obedience in bearing the infinite wrath of God on the cross constituted the full payment of our debt.
Paid in full.
Because the blood of the covenant was entirely sufficient to satisfy divine justice, death had no legal right to hold him. The Father had to raise the Son because the ledger was balanced. The blood forced the resurrection.
That is incredible. So verse 20 establishes all these objective facts of history. We have the God of peace who ended the war. We have the vindicated resurrection acting as the receipt. We have the great shepherd who guards the flock. And we have the covenant blood that satisfied justice. All of that history is acting as the massive foundation for the direct personal application we are about to see in verse 21.
The author lays down the massive concrete foundation before he builds the house. The text moves from the divine agent and historical vindication directly into the divine provision for the believer today.
What does verse 21 say?
Verse 21 says, "Equip you with everything good that you may do his will."
Let's dig into that word, equip. The sources indicate the original Greek language here is incredibly specific, and it just totally changes how we should read this.
Oh, it really does. The Greek verb used here is katartisai. Let's look at the grammatical mood first, because it tells us the author's tone. It is in the aorist active optative mood.
The optative mood.
Yes, and the optative mood is quite rare in the New Testament. You only find it about 68 times. It is not a command, and it is not a simple statement of fact. It is used to express a strong, fervent prayer or a confident wish.
So he's praying this over them.
The author is praying this reality over his exhausted readers. But the lexical definition of the word itself is what is truly stunning. It carries the meaning of making fit, restoring, preparing, or bringing a broken thing into proper working order.
Restoring something broken.
Yes. To give you a perfect parallel, it is the exact same word used in Matthew chapter 4, verse 21, when describing James and John sitting in their boat mending their fishing nets by the Sea of Galilee.
The net analogy is brilliant. Let's think about a listener who is struggling right now. Maybe they're driving to work, fighting an addiction they just cannot seem to beat.
We all have those struggles.
Yeah, or maybe they're carrying a deep bitterness toward a family member, and every time they try to forgive, they just fail. Sin fundamentally tore the fabric of our humanity. We are broken nets.
That's a great way to put it.
When you try to cast a broken net into the water to catch fish, the water just rushes through the holes. The fish swim right through. We are completely incapable of holding anything, let alone doing the massive holy will of God.
We can't do it on our own.
So when the text says God equips us, it means God is sitting on the shore, taking the torn, frayed cords of our soul, and he is actively mending the broken faculties so they function according to their original design.
And notice the vast scope of the provision as well. The text says he equips us with everything good. There is zero room for synergistic deficiency here.
He doesn't just give us half the equipment.
No, God does not provide 90% of the equipment and ask you to dig deep into your own pockets to find the remaining 10%. He provides the absolute entirety of the necessary equipment for your sanctification.
Every bit of it.
Every ounce of patience, every ounce of courage, every ounce of purity you need to do, his will is supplied by him. But the syntactical brilliance of this verse continues.
What's next?
The text says, "We are equipped that you may do his will," followed immediately by the phrase, "working in us that which is pleasing in his sight."
I want to slow down here because when I read the source material on this next point, I actually stopped and read it 3 times. It has to do with the word do and the word working. Break this down for us.
The author employs a rhetorical device called a polyptyton.
A polywet.
A polyptyton. This is a syntactical pun using words derived from the exact same root. The phrase "that you may do" uses the Greek word poiesai. And the phrase "working in us" uses the word poioshin. Both of these words derive from the identical root verb poios.
So they are basically the same word.
Yes. So if you were to read this literally, preserving the pun, the text says we do the will of God because God is doing in us. God's internal doing causes our external doing.
That is wild.
Furthermore, the word describing God's action is a present active participle. This indicates continuous, ongoing divine activity. God is not just winding you up like a toy and walking away. He is continuously doing the work inside of you so that you can do the work outside of you.
Okay, I have to stop and push back here. I am putting myself in the shoes of a listener who might be feeling a bit alarmed by this.
Sure, it can sound intense.
If God's internal doing causes my external doing, do I even exist as a moral agent? Does human effort matter at all?
That's the classic objection.
If I am listening to this, I might think, great, I'm going to go home, sit motionless on the couch, eat potato chips, and just wait for a bolt of lightning to make me holy. Because if God causes the obedience, I must be a robot.
Right.
This sounds like a recipe for quietism, where we do absolutely nothing and just, let go and let God.
That is the natural objection, but it completely misunderstands the mechanism of grace. This brings our conversation directly into the concept of compatibilism. Compatibilism is the biblical reality that God's sovereign decree over the human will perfectly coincides with genuine human volition.
They work together.
They do. God does not violate the human will. He does not put a gun to your head and force you to act against your desires. Instead, he resurrects the human will.
It changes what we want.
Yes. He illumines the darkened mind and renews the dead affections. Think of Psalm 110, verse 3. It says, "Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your might."
We offer ourselves freely.
We choose him freely and we act willingly, precisely because he has changed our nature to make us willing. We act the miracle, but he causes it.
Let's look at the specific example the sources bring up to illustrate this. It involves the Apostle Paul and his co-worker Titus in 2 Corinthians chapter 8.
Oh, this is a perfect example.
Paul writes that God put an earnest care for the Corinthian church into Titus's heart. God actively placed that specific desire there.
God caused the desire.
Yet, in the very next verse, Paul says that Titus went to Corinth of his own accord. If you ask Titus why he was packing his bags and traveling to Corinth, he would say, "Because I want to go. I care about them."
It was his choice.
It was entirely Titus's free choice. Yet God sovereignly placed the desire in his heart.
This raises an important question, though, about how we experience this daily. We need to consider how a believer actually lives this out.
Yeah, what does it feel like?
When a believer wakes up and fiercely fights a specific sin, or when they go out of their way to show radical love to an enemy who has wronged them, it feels like intense, exhausting human effort.
It feels like work.
They are sweating, they are crying, they are battling their own flesh, and it truly is human effort. The believer is thinking, choosing, and acting.
Right.
But the bedrock beneath that effort, the hidden spring providing the actual water for that action, is the relentless, ongoing activity of the Holy Spirit.
So what does this all mean? Let's step back and look at the landscape of church history. If this concept of God mending the net and causing the obedience was settled in the first century, why do I feel like I constantly hear opposite ideas today?
Because human nature fights this truth constantly.
How does this doctrine defend the church against the major historical heresies that have tried to distort this?
Throughout church history, whenever you sever human obedience from divine provision, you immediately drift into heresy. The human mind is naturally wired to want the credit for its own salvation.
We want to be the hero.
We do. Let's go back to the 5th century. You had a British monk named Pelagius. Pelagius looked at the moral laxity in the church and decided the solution was to emphasize human free will.
What did he argue?
He argued that humans possess an inherent moral capacity to obey God entirely without internal grace. He believed Adam's sin only affected Adam, and that we are all born as blank slates. In his view, grace was just the good example set by Jesus.
So Pelagius essentially told people, you have the engine, you just need to press the gas pedal harder.
That is precisely his argument. But Augustine of Hippo, who had lived a life of severe debauchery before his conversion, he knew from his own agonizing experience that the human will is completely enslaved to sin.
Augustine knew better.
He did. Augustine provided a crushing rebuttal to this error with a famous prayer. He prayed to God, "Command what you will and grant what you command."
Grant what you command.
Augustine recognized that God's demands are absolute, but God must sovereignly supply what he demands, or man is just doomed.
So Augustine crushed Pelagianism in the 5th century. But this idea didn't stay dead, did it? It feels like the human ego just repackaged it over and over. What happened in the 17th century?
In the 17th century, you see the rise of Arminianism. The followers of Jacobus Arminius, known as the Remonstrants, they argued that grace is necessary, but it is synergistic and ultimately resistible.
Synergistic meaning we cooperate with it.
Right. They taught that God offers grace to everyone equally, but the ultimate deciding factor, the final tipping point of salvation, is a human choice.
So God does 99%, and we do the 1%.
Yes, and this theology essentially teaches that God tries to save you, but you hold veto power over the Almighty. This dethrones God and elevates the fallen human will to the position of supreme arbiter.
That's a dangerous shift.
It is. And while we are discussing historical deviations, we must mention the Roman Catholic error codified at the Council of Trent in the 16th century.
How did Trent handle this issue of internal working and justification?
Trent taught the concept of infused righteousness. They conflated the legal declaration of justification with the internal process of sanctification.
They mixed them up.
They taught that God infuses grace into you, making you internally righteous, and then based on that internal change, God legally accepts you. They made your internal transformation the actual ground of your legal acceptance before God.
Wow.
But the biblical text, as we saw with the title God of Peace, insists that justification is based solely on the imputed righteousness of Christ outside of us, and sanctification is the fruit of that established peace.
Those are the historical deviations, but I look at modern church culture, and I see the exact same counterfeits dressed in modern clothing.
Oh, everywhere.
Modern seeker-sensitive pragmatism functions almost identically to Pelagianism. You can turn on the radio today or walk into a megachurch and hear sermons that treat the Bible like a self-help manual for behavioral modification.
Just practical tips.
Yeah, it's 10 steps to a better marriage or 5 ways to conquer your anxiety. It relies entirely on human willpower. It assumes the listener has the inherent strength to just try harder.
It's all law and no gospel.
It completely ignores the terrifying reality that without the sovereign mending of the Holy Spirit, we are broken nets incapable of holding a single drop of true righteousness.
In addition to the pragmatic self-help culture, you see liberal theology and certain modern social movements offering another massive counterfeit.
What's their angle?
These ideologies consistently locate the root of human brokenness in external systemic structures rather than the totally depraved human heart.
The problem is out there.
Right. They argue that if we just fix the political system or reorganize the economy or dismantle the hierarchy, humanity will naturally flourish. They offer a salvation based entirely on human activism and structural reorganization.
So they deny the internal problem.
While social structures can certainly be corrupt and require reform, the biblical text declares that the core problem is internal. True righteousness is exclusively the fruit of a heart that has been sovereignly regenerated and equipped by the God of peace.
So if we throw out moralism and we throw out self-help and we realize the system isn't going to save us, we still have a practical problem. The Bible is full of imperatives.
It definitely is.
We are commanded to love, to forgive, to be holy, to flee sexual immorality. If God is doing the working, what do we do with all these commands? This leads us to what theologians call the third use of the law.
Yes. The Protestant reformers talked about 3 uses of the law. The first use is to restrain societal evil. The second use is to act as a mirror, showing us our sin and driving us to Christ.
But the third use is different.
But the tertius usus legis, the third use of the law, is specifically for the believer. The law can never justify us. It has no capacity to save. However, it remains the exact standard and guide for the obedience that the Spirit produces in the believer.
It shows us what the mended net is supposed to catch.
Precisely. The Spirit does not produce a vague, abstract sense of spiritual goodness. He causes believers to walk specifically in God's revealed statutes. Acceptance with God is the root of our obedience, never the fruit.
But the fruit still has to be there.
But make no mistake, faith without visible fruit is a dead faith. The God who justifies always sanctifies.
The sources make a critical distinction here, though. Holiness is not just cold, mechanical rule-keeping. It is not just gritting your teeth and avoiding bad things.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to ask why God requires this transformation in the first place. The doxological goal of the passage is right there at the end.
To whom be glory forever and ever.
Yes. The reason God equips us and works in us is to make our faith visible as a public display of Christ's supreme worth. He changes us so that the universe can see how glorious his Son is.
The Puritan view detailed in our text captures this perfectly. They understood that true holiness is not asceticism.
No, not at all.
Asceticism is the medieval idea that you punish your body, you starve yourself, and you deny yourself all joy in order to impress God. That starves the soul.
It's miserable.
It is. On the flip side, worldly hedonism says you should indulge every fleshly desire you have. That poisons the soul into destruction. True holiness, according to the Puritans, is supreme happiness in God.
Supreme happiness. I love that.
We obey because we treasure the great shepherd above all earthly things. Sin is an idolatrous preference for anything over God. Holiness is preferring God over everything else and acting in joyful accord with that preference.
Think about how that realization alters the entire motivation for the Christian life. You are no longer obeying out of a legalistic terror of condemnation. You are not trying to bribe a celestial judge.
You're safe?
You are safe. You are obeying out of a restful assurance that the God of peace is actively supplying the strength for the very things he demands. You strive fiercely, you sweat and bleed in your fight against sin, but you do it from a foundation of absolute peace.
Let's bring this entire deep dive back to your daily reality as a listener. Think about your life tomorrow. Maybe you have a frustrating conversation waiting for you with a difficult family member.
We all have those.
Or maybe you have a private struggle with a temptation that nobody else in the world even knows about. You must strive against that sin fiercely. You must put forth maximum effort to love the people who annoy you.
You can't just be passive.
Right. but you do it entirely from a posture of restful peace, knowing the engine of grace is running within you. You are a mended net.
I want to offer a word of comfort drawn directly from the text for anyone listening who just feels utterly defeated today.
That's so needed.
The Great Shepherd does not despise bruised reeds. If you are a believer and you feel the agonizing, exhausting resistance of remaining sin in your life, you might be tempted to despair.
You might think you're failing.
You might look at your repeated failures and think God has abandoned you. But that very struggle, that hatred of your own sin, is proof of the Spirit's life within you. Dead bodies do not fight.
Oh, that's powerful.
Only living things struggle. The God who raised Christ from the dead is actively working in you. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the historical proof that God's prevailing providence is vastly stronger than your daily instability.
We want to leave you with a final thought to consider today. Think about the hidden battles you fight, the ones that never make it to social media.
The quiet moments.
Yeah. What if the most unseen, hidden act of resistance against a specific sin today, an act no one else will ever know about, a moment where you bite your tongue instead of speaking in anger, or you turn your eyes away from a screen when you are alone in the dark? What if that invisible act is actually a cosmic display to the heavenly realms of Christ's complete victory?
It's beautiful to think about.
What if our hidden spirit-wrought obedience is the very theater of Christ's glory? The engine has been placed inside you by the God of peace. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Rest in the God of peace.